The council hall was enormous. It stretched wide and tall like a building, made for creatures much bigger than anything still alive. The walls were covered in glowing panels showing star maps and old records. The ceiling disappeared into a thin layer of manufactured mist so high up that the seats near the top were just shapes in a haze. 17 alien civilizations had their places here. Each one had its own section, its own lighting, its own air mix humming quietly through vents in the walls. Humanity had a folding table. The back, Nora Calloway sat at that table with both hands resting flat on a thin data pad and looked straight ahead. She was 34 years old. She had dark brown hair pulled back tight in the kind of face that most people read as calm, though calm was not exactly the right word. Controlled was closer. She wore the standard Earth diplomatic uniform, deep navy with small brass buttons and a little Earth emblem stitched on the left shoulder. It was still stiff. She had worn it 4 times now, and it still felt borrowed. Beside her sat Owen Grier. He was 61 years old, broad through the shoulders, and had the particular stillness of a man who had spent most of his life in uniform and had never really come all the way out of it. He was looking down at his notes, but Nora could tell he was watching the room the same way he always watched rooms, like he was quietly counting exits. They moved us again, Owen said, not looking up. 3M, Nora said. Last session we were near the door. We are still near the door. We are behind the door now. That's different. She almost smiled. The session had been called with almost no warning, which was not normal. The Velari conclave ran on schedule so tight and old that they had become something close to religion. Proposals were filed months in advance. Debates were timed to the minute. An emergency session meant something had broken. Through all of that, something that could not wait. Nora had read the brief. On the way over, she had read it 3 times, each time a small and honest part of her had asked the same quiet question: is this actually real? The Velkarif, even the name was strange. Different species translated it differently. The consuming silence, the old dark, the drifting end, but the Velari called it the Velkarif, and that name had spread through every council language the way old words do. When they carry enough weight, nobody bothered replacing them with something neater. Delegate Shiro opened the session without ceremony. He stood close to 3M, tall, with a broad flat head and eyes that was silver and completely still, the way water in a very deep bowl is still. He spoke in the trade language, and the translator in Nora's earpiece turned it into English with a half-second delay, just long enough to feel slightly wrong. The Velkarth has been confirmed active near the Oath system, he said. This is not a rumor. 3 scout vessels were sent. None returned signals. Imaging from the Duvari monitoring station has confirmed the energy signature. There is no question in this matter. The hall went quiet in a way large halls filled with many different kinds of living things rarely go quiet. It was not just an absence of sound, it was something heavier coming in to replace it. For the benefit of observer delegations, Cyro continued, and his tone when he said observer was the tone of someone explaining a simple thing to a child who was not really supposed to be in the room. The Velkarth is an entity of unknown origin and unknown age. It has appeared 4 times in recorded council history. Each appearance ended in the complete collapse of at least one Civilization, power systems fail. Communications stop, ships go dark. It does not respond to contact. It does not negotiate. It does not change its path. He paused. It simply moves through, and when it does, things stop working. Permanently. Owen leaned close to Nora's ear. "They're scared," he said quietly. She did not answer. She had already known that. From the moment they walked in, fear had a particular weight in rooms with recycled air. It did not matter what species was doing the fearing, it always settled the same way. A delegate from the Ravine faction, small, gray-skinned, with 4 arms folded across their chest, raised a query flag. "What is the projected path?" "It is moving along the outer corridor," Cyril said. "Current modeling places it through 7 inhabited systems over the next 14 months. 7 systems." Nora did the math quietly. Not all heavily populated, but the Duvari home world sat in that corridor. So did the second largest Velarite colony and a human research station, small, 43 people, mostly geologists and one very patient botanist who had been requesting a transfer for 8 months and kept getting lost in the conclave filing system. She raised her hand. Cyril looked at her the way someone looks at a piece of furniture. That made a sound. Observer delegates do not have floor access during emergency sessions, he said. "I understand," Nora said. She kept her hand up. 4 seconds passed. In this hall, 4 seconds was a long time. Several delegates turned toward her section. "Earth's representation does not have the floor," Cyril said again, slower this time. "I heard you," Nora said. "I have a question about the 7 systems." Owen had gone very still beside her, not tense, more like a man watching something begin and understanding there was no stopping it. Now, Siro and LT Unk and GT, silver eyes settled on Nora for a long moment. Then he made a small gesture with his lower hand, the Velthari version of a controlled exhale. "You may submit your question in written form after the session concludes. It will be reviewed within the standard processing window of 40 days, Nora said. "The Velkarth will reach the Oath system in 11. The silence that followed was a different kind, not the heavy silence of fear, a sharper silence, the kind that falls when someone says out loud the thing everyone was pretending not to think about. Ciro drew himself up to his full height. "The observer delegate will stand down. With respect," Nora said, lowering her hand slowly. "I would rather stand up." Owen closed his notebook. He wore the particular expression of a man deciding between alarmed and proud and landing somewhere that was honestly a little of both. Ciro said nothing for 5 full seconds. Then he turned back to the hall and continued the session as though Nora had not spoken at all. The way very large and very old things sometimes ignore smaller things, not because they did not notice, but because noticing them openly would mean admitting they were worth noticing. But the room had shifted just slightly, the way a room shifts when something walks in uninvited, sits down, and does not apologize for it. Nora settled back in her chair. She had not fixed anything. She had not said anything clever. She had not won any argument or changed any vote. She had simply refused to be quiet in a room that had been built very carefully to keep her quiet. It was, she thought, a reasonable start. Outside the hall's thick walls, 11 days away at the speed of light, something vast and old and absolutely silent was drifting Through the dark between stars, it had been moving for longer than most of the civilizations in this room had existed. It did not know about the conclave. It did not know about the folding table. Near the back, it did not know about Nora Calloway, not yet the archive. Room was cold and smelled like old metal, and something faintly sweet that Nora could not identify. The walls were lined with data columns, tall, narrow pillars of stored light, each one containing thousands of years of records from species that had been watching the sky long before humans figured out that the sky was worth watching. Marrow was already there when Nora and Casey arrived. He was a Divari, which meant he was roughly the size of a large dog if that dog stood upright and had 6 fingers on each hand and eyes the color of dried grass. He was old, even by Divara standards, which many moved carefully and spoke slowly and never wasted a single word. He had pulled 3 data columns to a central table and was sorting through them the way a very experienced person sorts through things, without looking directly at what he was doing, letting his hands remember where everything was. He had asked to see them after the session ended, not officially. No flag, no formal request rooted through the conclave filing system. He had simply appeared at the edge of the corridor as they were leaving and said, very quietly, "Come." Casey Drum walked in behind Nora and looked around the room the way young people look at very old things, with wide eyes and a slight open mouth and the expression of someone doing fast private math about how much history was packed into how small space. Casey was 26 years old and had 3 advanced degrees in xenobiology, and still sometimes forgot to eat lunch. She was the best person on Earth's delegation at reading biological data, which was exactly why Nora had brought her. Marrow did not waste time on introductions. He pulled up a display. From the first column, a wide projection of moving light that resolved into footage so old the edges of the image were damaged and blurry, like a photograph left too long in the sun. "This is the 4th recorded appearance," he said, 240 years ago by council, reckoning a colony world in the Fen corridor. The Velkarith entered the system from the dark side of the outer planet. By the time the colony registered its signature, it was already inside their grid range. The footage showed what looked like a city from above. Lights were on everywhere, the steady, familiar glow of a civilization that had been running on power infrastructure long enough to forget it was doing so. Then slowly the lights began to go out, not all at once, not in an explosion. Sector by sector, block by block, like someone walking through the city and pressing each light off with one finger. Within 6 minutes of footage, the city was completely dark. How many people? Nora asked. 400,000 in that city alone, Marrow said. The full system had nearly 2 billion. He paused. None of the infrastructure ever came back online. The Velkarith does not break things in the way a weapon breaks things. It is more accurate to say it removes something from them, whatever quality allows technology to function. It takes that and it does not return it. Casey was leaning forward. What does it feed on? Is it feeding? Is this a predator behavior or something else? We do not know, Marrow said simply. What do we know about it biologically? Marrow looked at Casey with something that on a human face would have been mild surprise, the expression of someone who had been asked a question they had not expected to be asked. It is not Biological, he said, it is not a living creature in any framework any council species has successfully applied, but it behaves, Nora said. Yes, it moves, it reacts, it avoids some things and goes toward others. Yes, Marrow said again. He was quiet for a moment. That is precisely the part the conclave has never been able to explain. He moved to the second data column and pulled up more footage, older. The resolution was so low that the images were mostly shapes and guesswork. There was a time stamp in the bottom corner. That when Casey translated it into standard years made her go very quiet. For a moment, this footage was nearly 6,000 years old. It showed something large and dim moving through a system that had clearly already gone dark, dead. Ships drifting at bad angles, a station with no lights, debris turning slowly in. Silence, the Velkarth at the center of the image was hard to see directly. It seemed to absorb the light around it. Rather than reflect it, it was enormous. It moved the way things move in deep water, not fast, not slow, just utterly unbothered by the idea of resistance. And then it stopped. Nora straightened slightly. Why did it stop? Watch, Marrow said. The footage continued. The Velkarth drifted the smallest, slowest change of direction. And then it was still not moving at all for 3 full minutes of footage. It simply hung there in the dark doing nothing. Then the footage ended. That's it, Casey said. That is all we have of that encounter. Marrow said. The monitoring equipment on the station failed shortly after that point. We do not know what it encountered. We do not know why it stopped. He looked at both of them carefully, but it went dormant. The systems in that area, the ones that were still functioning at the edge of its range, were not affected. It stopped before it reached them, and it remained stopped for what our model suggests was close to 40 years before it moved again. Casey looked at the frozen last frame of the footage, the Velkarth hanging in the dark, not attacking, not consuming, just still. Something was there, Casey said, in the footage just before it stopped. Something came close to it. We were unable to identify it clearly, Marrow said. The resolution, can you enhance the last 30 seconds? Marrow worked the column carefully. The image sharpened. Not much, but enough. And there at the very edge of the frame, moving slowly toward the vast dark shape of the Velkarth, was something small. Something that read on the sensors as warm, as alive, as producing almost no electromagnetic output at all, no grid signal, no power signature, no technology of any kind. Something biological. Something quiet. What species? Nora asked. Marrow checked the record. He was silent for a moment. The world in this sector at that time was pre-technological, no greed infrastructure, no space travel. They never developed beyond a basic agricultural level. He paused again. They are extinct now. A star event 3,000 years ago. There is no one left to ask. Casey looked at Nora. Nora looked at the small warm shape on the blurry screen, a living thing with no technology, walking slowly towards something that had destroyed every civilization that ever came at it with weapons and power grids and desperate, complicated plans. She looked at her own hand resting on the edge of the table. We are the only ones, she said quietly. Not really to anyone in the room who still know how to be that quiet. Casey understood immediately. Marrow tilted his head the way Duvari do when they are processing something that does not fit the shape of the box they had already built for it. Outside in the corridors of the conclave, the other 17 civilizations were already talking about weapons and barriers and strategies none of them believed in. They were doing what advanced civilizations always do when something threatens them, reaching for the most powerful tools they had. Nobody was thinking about what it meant to have no tools at all, nobody except the species with the folding table. The back door. Nora spent most of the night sitting at the narrow desk in her quarters with a cup of cold tea and a blank writing screen and the particular focus of someone who knows they have one chance to say something clearly and is determined not to waste it. The idea was simple, explaining it was not. She wrote it out 7 times. Each time she got to the middle of it, she stopped and read back what she had written and asked herself if it sounded like science or like something a person says quietly into a dark room when they are very tired and slightly frightened. 3 of the 7 versions went into the delete file. The other 4 she put side by side and read them against each other until one of them started to feel like the truth instead of just an argument. That was the one she brought to the conclave floor in the morning. Owen had read it before she went in. He sat on the edge of her cot in his socks with his glasses low on his nose and his coffee untouched beside him, and he read the whole thing without saying anything. When he finished, he put it down carefully and looked at her. "They're going to laugh," he said. "Some of them." She said, "Ciro is definitely going to laugh." "Ciro doesn't laugh. He'll do that thing with his lower hand." Owen looked at the document again. "You know, this could also just be wrong." "I know. But you don't think it is?" "No," Nora said. "I don't think it is." He picked up his coffee. It had gone cold, but he drank it anyway, the way he always did, without making a face about it. "Then let's go make fools of ourselves in front of 17 alien civilizations," he said, which was his version of "I'm with you." The conclave chamber was full. Word had moved fast. 3 more council worlds had confirmed their monitoring stations were picking up the Velkaratha's signature, and the projected path models were tightening. The uncertainty range was collapsing, which meant the situation was becoming more real in the specific way that very bad things become more real when you can no longer pretend the math is approximate. Nora had submitted a formal floor request that morning, first time Earth's delegation had ever done it. There were procedures, there were forms, there was a standard waiting period of, as it turned out, 20 minutes when the conclave secretary, a small efficient creature with too many administrative titles, realized that the human had filled out the forms correctly, which was apparently rare enough to be worth moving quickly on. She stood at the small raised platform reserved for floor speakers. It was clearly built for taller species. She stood up straight, and the top of her head came to a point about a meter below where most delegates' faces would naturally be. She did not adjust the speaking column. She left it where it was and spoke normally. "The Velkarif," she said, "has destroyed every civilization that tried to stop it. I am not going to argue that humanity has a better weapon or a better strategy. We do not. What I want to suggest is that we have been asking the wrong question." The hall was quiet, but not in a good way. It was the quiet of people deciding how quickly to stop listening. Every civilization the Velkarith has ever touched was using advanced power infrastructure, grid-based energy, Electromagnetic communications. Artificial systems lay on top of artificial systems. That is not a coincidence. The archive records show that the one time the Velkarth ever stopped, the only thing that changed was the presence of a living creature with no technology, angry signature, no energy output other than biological heat. Siro made the gesture with his lower hand, exactly as Owen had predicted. Creature doesn't attack, Nora continued. It reacts, it responds to something in the environment. Specifically, it responds to the density of artificial electromagnetic output. The more complex and powerful the technology around it, the more active it becomes, the more it consumes. It is not a predator in the way we understand predators. It is more like, she paused, choosing the word carefully, an immune response. The galaxy's older civilizations grew so loud, electromagnetically speaking, that something in the universe reacted to the noise, and the Velkarith is what that reaction looks like. The silence now was different, still not comfortable, but different. Humanity, she said, is the youngest space-faring species in this conclave. We are also by a significant margin the species that still has the strongest connection to our biological baseline. We still live close to the surface of our planet in large numbers. We still grow things in soil. We still have dark places and quiet places, and people who go weeks without touching a powered system. We are loud when we choose to be, but we are also still capable, genuinely capable, not as a theory, of being almost completely quiet. She let that sit for a moment. I am proposing that a single human individual approach the Velkarith in a vessel with no active power systems, no weapons, no greed, no emissions beyond the biological, manual oxygen supply only, and that individual will attempt direct contact. The hall erupted, not loudly. Alien councils rarely made dramatic noise, but the air changed the specific way it changes when multiple different species all start talking at once in their own languages, and the whole room becomes a low hum of controlled alarm. Siro raised both primary hands for quiet. The observer delegate is proposing, he said very flatly, to send a single human in a dead ship toward the most destructive entity in recorded history. Yes, Nora said, on the basis of 6,000-year-old blurry footage and a theory, and the fact that everything else has failed, she said. Every weapon, every barrier, every complicated strategy, everything you have tried in 4 recorded encounters has not worked. I am not asking the conclave to take a risk. I am asking it to allow me to take one. Owen, from the back of the room, had his hands folded on the table in front of him. He was not looking at Nora. He was looking at the floor, the way a person looks at the floor when they are working very hard to stay still. Back on Earth, transmitted across several light minutes of lag, Dr. Petravos was watching the feed from her lab. She had been pulled in remotely because she was the best xenobiologist Earth had, and also because Nora had trusted her since they were 22 years old, and she needed at least one familiar voice in the background of this. Petra had read Nora's theory the night before and had sent back a message that said, the science is thin, but it's not wrong. And then a second message 30 seconds later that said, please don't die. Nora had not replied yet. She would, she told herself. After the conclave did not agree to the plan, they did not refuse it either. They tabled it for emergency deliberation, which in conclave language meant that they were going to argue about it for as long as they possibly could before accepting that no one had a better idea. It took 6 hours. At the end of 6 hours, with the Velkarth now 9 days from the oath system and the model still tightening, the conclave voted 14 against 2 abstentions, 1 in favor. Marrow, who raised his small gray hand very steadily and held it there, it was not enough to approve, but it was enough to not officially forbid, and in the conclave's very precise procedural language, those 2 things were different. Nora walked out of the chamber and found Owen waiting for her in the corridor. So he said, 9 days, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Who's flying you out there, Dale Hurst? The Luna's edge is already at the outer corridor, and the ship they're putting you in a short-range scout there. Stripping it now. No weapons, no grid, no active systems, manual O2, a hand crank lamp. Owen was quiet for a moment. A hand crank lamp, he said. I thought it was a nice touch. He looked like he had more to say. He did not say it. Instead, he nodded once, short and deliberate, and fell into step beside her as she walked toward the docking bay, which was as close to a blessing as Owen Grier had ever given anyone for anything. The Lacuna's edge held its position at the edge of the debris field and did not move. Commander Dale Hurst stood at the forward observation window with his arms folded and watched the small scout vessel drift away from his ship until it was a shape, and then a dot, and then something he had to look for carefully against the dark. He had not said much to Nora before she left. He was not a man who was good at the kinds of conversations that happened before people did things that might kill them. He had offered his hand and she had shaken it, and he had said, "We in LT Unc and GT LL be right here," and she had nodded and said, "I know," and that had been enough because it was true, and they both knew it was true, and nothing else that could have been said would have added to that. Inside the scout vessel, Nora was alone. The ship was barely bigger than a standard transit pod. 2 seats, though there was no one in the second one, a small storage compartment behind the seats that held the manual oxygen canisters, 6 of them enough for 36 hours, a hand crank lamp mounted to the console with a rubber strap, no power display, no navigation grid, no communications array. The windows were clear and real, actual transparent material, not digital feed, and through the forward one she could see the debris field spreading out ahead of her. The debris field was what was left of the Oth-9 colony, ships, mostly 14 of them in various states of coming apart, drifting at wrong angles in the dark. Some of them still had their shapes. Some had been reduced to loose collections of material that turned slowly and caught no light. There was no station anymore. The station had simply stopped working, and then over time stopped holding itself together. The colony on the surface below was still there. The buildings were still standing. The streets were still laid out in their careful grid, but nothing in it worked. The power had gone out 4 months ago when the Velkarth passed close enough to the outer moon. 4 months was not long enough for most of the structures to decay. It was long enough for every living thing on the surface to be gone. Nora did not look at the planet for long. She focused on her breathing instead, in through the nose. Count to 4, out through the mouth. Count to 4. She had learned this from her father, who had learned it from his, who had used it in situations significantly less extreme than drifting alone in a dead ship toward an entity that had ended civilizations. She figured that gave the technique reasonable track record. She had been drifting for 2 hours when she saw it. It did not announce itself. There was no light, there was no sound. Sound needed a medium, and space was not one, but there was a change in the quality of the dark ahead of her, a deepening, a place where the stars at the far edge of her window were not present in the way stars were supposed to be present, not obscured exactly, but simply absent. Way a word is absent from a sentence that got too long and had to be trimmed. The Velkarth was there. She cranked the lamp once. It threw a small circle of yellow light across the console and the empty second seat. It was absurd and warm and entirely human, that little light, and something about it made her chest tight in a way she did not try to name. It was big. She had known it was big from the archive footage. Knowing something from footage, and then floating in front of it in a silent pod were two different kinds of knowing. It filled most of her forward window. It did not look like a weapon or a monster or a creature in any category she had language for. It looked old. It looked pale in the way things that have never seen direct sunlight are pale. Its surface, if surface was the right word for something that had no clear edge, moved in slow patterns, the way the surface of very deep water moves when something far below shifts its position. Not threatening, not rushing, just present, the way old things are present, with the particular heaviness of something that has been exactly what it is for longer than anything around it can measure. The tendrils came first. That was how Casey had described them in the archive footage, and the word fit. Long-reaching extensions of the main body curling outward the way roots curl when they are looking for something in the soil. They moved toward Nora's ship with the slow certainty of something that had done this many, many times before, and then they stopped. Not gradually, not a slowdown. They stopped the way a sound stops when the thing making it suddenly realizes the room is different than it thought. The tendrils hung in the space between Nora's ship and the main body of the Velkarth, not retreating, not advancing, just still. The way an animal goes still when it encounters a smell it has not encountered before and is deciding what to do with it. Nora waited. She kept breathing. In 4 counts, out 4 counts, the lamp made its small yellow circle. Her heartbeat was fast but even. She could feel it in her fingertips and in the base of her throat. She was afraid. She had been afraid since she left the lacuna's edge, and she was not going to pretend otherwise, even to herself. But fear and stillness were not the same thing, and she had always been good at knowing the difference. 2 minutes passed. The tendrils did not move. She unbuckled her harness. She moved to the compartment at the rear and took out the suit, a basic EVA suit, mechanically sealed with a small manual oxygen pack and no powered systems of any kind. It took her 11 minutes to put it on alone, which was awkward, and she thought distantly that this was probably the least dignified part of the whole thing, and nobody would ever write about it. She checked the seals the way she had been trained. She checked them again because there was no one else to check them. She went to the hatch. She opened it. The difference between the inside of the ship and the outside was absolute. Inside there had been air and the small sound of the lamp's mechanism and the faint creak of the hull adjusting to temperature. Outside there was nothing At all, no sound, no air, just the dark. And the cold and the enormous pale shape. Filling most of what she could see, she pushed off gently from the hatch and drifted. She did not go fast. There was no reason to go fast. Fast would have been the wrong thing. Fast was the language of urgency, and urgency was a form of noise, and she was trying very deliberately to be as quiet as a living thing could be. She moved the way the old footage had shown that ancient, pre-technological creature moving slowly, with no hesitation but also no rush. Way a person moves towards something they do not fully understand but are not afraid to be near. The Velkarth was still, the tendrils were still. She reached out her hand, not to grab, not to push, not with any purpose beyond the simplest, oldest one, the gesture of a creature extending itself towards something unknown with an open palm and no weapon and nothing to prove. The nearest surface of the Velkarth brushed her glove, somewhere far behind her on the Luna's edge. Every person on the bridge stopped breathing. The Velkarth shuddered deep and slow, the kind of shudder that is not pain and is not fear, but is something that has no name in any human language, the shudder of something very old being touched for the first time by something that was not afraid of it and was not trying to use it and was not in any electromagnetic or technological sense even really there at all. Nora floated. She did not move away. She did not move closer. She simply stayed, glove resting gently against the pale vast surface of the oldest thing in the known universe, and breathed. For a long moment nothing happened. Nora floated in the dark with her glove against the surface of the Velkarth, and the only sounds in the whole universe, as far as she was concerned, with a soft cycle of her own breathing and the very faint mechanical tick of the oxygen pack on her back. Surface under her glove was not warm and not cold. It was not hard and not soft. It did not feel like anything she had vocabulary for. It was simply there, in the way that very old things are simply there, without explanation, without apology, without any need for either. Then the Velkarth shuddered again, not violently, not like an explosion building itself up from the inside. It was a deep, slow movement that started at the point where Nora's glove made contact and spread outward across the surface like a ripple spreading across still water. It moved all the way to the outer edges of the creature's vast shape and kept going out into the surrounding space until it was a vibration that every hole and every piece of drifting wreckage in the debris field picked up and passed along on the lacuna's edge. Commander Dale Hurst felt it in the soles of his feet before any instrument registered it. The hull of his ship vibrated for exactly 4 seconds, like the lowest string on the largest instrument ever built being plucked once and allowed to finish its note in full. Then it stopped in the center of the debris field. The Velkarth began to come apart. It did not explode. There was no light, no heat, no shock wave. It simply began to dissolve at its outermost edges, the way sea foam dissolves when it reaches dry sand, quietly, without drama, without leaving anything behind. The pale surface lost its coherence first. Then the deeper structures, whatever they were, followed layer after layer, from the outside in, breaking into particles so fine they were invisible individually and only registered as a kind of dimness in the dark, a slow spreading cloud of something that was no longer the Velkarth, but was not yet nothing either. Nora floated in the middle of it. The particles drifted past. A suit past a visor, past a glove that was still extended, still open. They caught no light because there was no light to catch. They made no sound because there was no medium for sound. They simply spread outward into the space around her, thinning and thinning, until the last of them became indistinguishable from the ordinary dark of open space, and then the Velkarth was gone, not defeated, not destroyed. The word that came to Nora, drifting there, alone in the quiet with her arms still extended and her breathing still steady, was finished. The Velkarth was finished. It had been doing what it did for longer than any civilization in the Conclave had records for, moving through the noise, responding to the noise, unable to stop because there was always more noise, always more electromagnetic density, always another civilization cranking up its grid and its weapons and its complicated, brilliant, desperate technology, and pointing all of it at something it did not understand. And then after all that time, something had come toward it without any of that. Something small and warm and quiet with an open hand and nothing to prove. It had finished. Nora lowered her arm. She turned slowly in space and found the lacuna's edge with her eyes, a gray shape, steady and unmoving at the edge of the debris field, running lights on, waiting exactly where it said it would wait. She began the slow drift back toward it. Inside the ship, Dale met her at the hatch himself. He helped her out of the suit without saying anything. His hands were not quite steady. He did not comment on that, and neither did she. When the suit was off and the hatch was sealed and the ship's air was moving again, she sat down in the nearest chair, and he handed her a coffee from the machine at the wall, and she took it with both hands and held it and let the warmth come through to her palms. "Are you all right?" he said. "I think so." She said yes. He nodded. He looked like he wanted to ask something else and was deciding whether to. What was it like?" he said, "when you touched it?" Nora thought about it. She looked at her coffee. "Tired," she said. "It felt tired." Dale did not say anything to that, but he sat down in the chair across from her, which felt like the right thing to do. At the Conclave, the news arrived before the official report. Monitoring equipment across the outer corridor registered the Velkaratha's signature, collapsing in real time. Station after station went from active tracking to signal lost to clear sky over the course of about 8 minutes, as the updates moved at light speed back toward the council chambers. Siro was in the middle of a procedural statement about containment resource allocation when his secondary aide placed a single data slip on the surface in front of him. He looked at it. He stopped speaking. He did not begin speaking again for quite a long time. In the archives, Marrow sat very still at his data table with both sets of hands folded in his lap. The display in front of him was still showing the last frame of the 6,000-year-old footage. The blurry shape of the small, pre-technological creature extended towards something vast and pale and ancient, and the Velkarth going still. He looked at that image for a long time. Then he closed the display very gently and sat in the dark by himself for a while. Owen received the confirmation on a small screen in the Conclave's lower corridor, where he had been pacing for the past 4 hours because there was nothing else useful to do, and pacing at least kept his hands occupied. He read the message. He stood still. He read it again. Then he sat down on the floor of the corridor with his back against the wall which was completely undignified. And he did not care at all and put his face in his hands for a moment, not crying, just needing somewhere to put the feeling. Petra's message sent across. 14 minutes of transmission lag from her lab on Earth arrived later, it said. You absolute idiot. Then on the next line, I can't believe it worked. Then on the next line, smaller, are you okay? He said it would not add anything. And he was wrong. Please call me. 3 weeks later, Nora was back on Earth. She was standing on the fire escape outside her apartment in the early morning in an old gray sweater with a small hole at the left cuff, holding a mug of coffee. That was the right temperature this time. The city was just waking up. The sky was going from dark blue to something lighter at the edges. That quiet shift that happened every morning, regardless of what the day had in store. Pigeons were arranged on a wire across the alley in a row, ruffled and unhurried, doing whatever pigeons do at that hour. Owen called. She answered on the second ring. They want to give you a title, he said without preamble, because Owen was not a preamble kind of person. The conclave, something ceremonial. It translates roughly as a pause, the sound of paper, which was very Owen Vashful. The one who quieted the storm. Nora watched a pigeon on the wire shuffle sideways 2 steps for no reason that was clear to anyone. Tell them thank you, she said. They also want to upgrade Earth's delegation status. Full member seat, proper table. They're moving you from the back. That's good, she said. Owen, that's really good. That matters. It does, he agreed. What about the title? She looked at her coffee. She looked at the lightning sky. She thought about the dark and the cold and the vast, tired thing dissolving into dust around her open hand, and the tick of the oxygen pack and the feeling of very old weight lifting in a way that had no name in any language she knew. I'm just a person, she said. A pause on the line. I'll tell them that, Owen said. They won't know what to do with it. No, he agreed. They will not. Another pause. Shorter. Get some rest, Nora. I will. She hung up. The pigeon on the wire ruffled its feathers one more time and settled. The sky kept getting lighter, the way it always did, patient and indifferent and reliably there, the way the best things always are. She finished her coffee. The city woke up around her, making all its ordinary noise, and it was the best sound she had heard in weeks.